Hello, my dear church boys, and welcome to St. Robert's podcast episode number 58. And in this episode, I'm sitting down and having some beers and champagne with Dr. Jack. Dr. Jack has a PhD, he is a scientist, an engineer, and an entrepreneur. But at the same time, he is a big enthusiast of drugs and especially psychedelics. So if you're someone who's trying to balance your degenerate and geek sides or your game and health side, you might love this podcast episode just as much as I loved recording it. We discuss altered states of consciousness and psychedelic drugs. We go over topics like how to explore altered states of consciousness without using any drugs. We also talk about how to get the serious guys around you, the serious people around you, accept the crazy part of who you are. So maybe you work in a serious office job, or maybe you have serious friends and you want them to kind of acknowledge and accept your crazier part of your personality, of your life. So Dr. Jack goes over how he has found it possible to do. And around 1 hour in, we go into pretty specific things about drugs. We talk about mostly about LSD, a little bit about mushrooms, but it's some pretty concrete tips and tricks. And we talk a bit about how to minimize risks as much as it is possible. Obviously, you can't remove all the risks when taking drugs, that's for sure. But we talk about Dr. Jack's opinions on how he thinks you should. You shouldn't. How he thinks a person who wants to do it can minimize the risks. And obviously, you have to understand, and I've said this several times in the past, I am not encouraging anyone to do drugs. If you hear me talking about how I talk about the topic on the dates with girls, how I do that in my day game sets, or how I'm sometimes experimenting with some substances, that's something I like to do. That's my choice. I've spent a lot of time exploring those things before I did them, and it's still, the more I delve into this topic, the deeper I dive into this topic, the more I realized how it is dangerous and how it's not something you should play around with. So I'm definitely not encouraging you to do anything with drugs because of all the risks, safety risks, both physical and psychological, and obviously legal consequences, because in most places in the world, all of those things are illegal. One thing I didn't think about when recording this podcast. Well, we were recording this podcast sitting in Mario's living room. If you don't know who Mario is, you can go back to episode 45 about how hard learning Daygame can be. It's a student story. It's a story of how Mario learned Daygame. And I was in Malta, and I spent a week staying at Mario's, sleeping on his lovely couch in his living room, and we were riding his motorbike around Malta, exploring nature, doing cliff diving, and several other pretty dumb things. And Mario introduced me to Dr. Jack, their childhood friends, and we were just sitting on a couch, drinking beer, drinking champagnes, and recording this podcast. And Dr. Jack was eating his fries, which I didn't think could be heard on a podcast, but at some points you can hear the chewing noises, so I apologize for that. And since I get a lot of questions about where I am and what's going on, a little update on what has been happening. I'm recording this podcast intro from Porto, Portugal, which is a smaller city with 250,000 people, if I'm not mistaken. And I've been here for 1.5 weeks. I've been coaching a student. We did 5 days of infield coaching, and when I first arrived here, I wasn't a big fan of the city. Well, the city is very, very beautiful. It's very amazing. But I wasn't a big fan of girls, but the more I stay here, the more I start liking them. They have their curves. They have, you can find very, very different girls here, both with bigger asses, bigger tits, and also very nice and very petite girls. So I actually starting to enjoy the city more and more, and I will probably stay here for a few more weeks unless they lock the city down, because right now you have to wear a mask inside, you have to wear a mask outside. Basically, whenever you are not in your apartment, you have to wear a mask. There is a curfew after 11 p.m., I think, if I'm not mistaken, until 5 a.m. And on the weekends, there is a curfew starting at 1 p.m., which starts this weekend. And why I'm telling this? Because it's very simple. We did 5 days of infield coaching. We were wearing masks and we were approaching girls in masks. And I get a lot of questions. How do I day game in a mask? How does it change in a mask? I cannot approach in a mask. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And the only thing I can tell you about day gaming in masks is that nothing really changes. We did exactly the same things. We did the same open, the same stack, we did the same structure, and girls still loved it. It was still amazing. And sometimes you go on a date, they take off their mask, and you find out that without their mask they look much better than they did with the mask. So if mask is something that's taking you from day gaming and taking action, then I can assure you that day gaming with or without the mask is exactly the same. And before we get down to the conversation with Dr. Jack, just a few housekeeping items. Well, first of all, you know that I'm recording this podcast every week, maybe every second week, depending on how busy I am with my infield and Skype coaching schedule. But there often are things I want to share with my audience, some ideas, some plans, etc., some tips. And most of those things don't make it to the podcast. Most of those things I simply send out to my mailing list, or I post it in our Telegram Daygame Church group chat. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of those things, then make sure you are subscribed to the mailing list and you've joined our group chat. To do both of those things, you can simply go to my website, strobert.blog, that is strobert.blog, and fill out the form at the top of the website. And in the welcome email, you will also receive a link you can use to join our Telegram Daygame Church group chat. So make sure you do that. When you're learning Daygame, there are so many things you have to focus on to get better at seduction. You have to overcome approach anxiety. You have to learn to fix your voice, open strong, and open in the right way. You have to learn to stack, to storytell, to tease, to build comfort, to close strong, etc. When students send me their recorded sets or simply have coaching calls, I can very fast notice the biggest mistakes they're making. I'll listen to 2 or 3 conversations and see them repeating those mistakes over and over again. Things they didn't know they're doing. Learning everything at once is a very slow way to improve, but when I point out the most important mistakes they're making and what are the exact few things they should focus on during the next 100 sets, students start improving much faster. I worked this way with guys from all over the world, USA, all over EU, UK, even Dubai. If you want me to help you find out what are the biggest mistakes you're making that are stopping you from getting better results in day game, just sign up for a Skype coaching call. You can do that by going to strobert.blog forward slash call. That is strobert.blog/call. And the last thing I want to mention, especially for nomadic day gamers, nomadic travelers who are traveling around the world and who don't have a 9 to 5 job where they have to sit in one country and they have to self-isolate or sit in a quarantine or anything like that. I'll stay in Portugal for a few more weeks, but there is a chance that Mr. T will be coming to Europe from USA. Mr. T is another day gamer that we have recorded several podcasts with, and we will go on some day game adventures in one of the countries that isn't locked down. It might be Serbia, it might be Montenegro, it might be somewhere else. We actually have no idea yet. It really will come down, it will be clear basically when he comes to Europe. So if you are someone who is still traveling around, still enjoying life, or at least can work remotely, and you want to join us for some crazier adventures and shitload of day game and get some day game coaching, then get in contact with me by sending me an email to robert@strobert.blog, and I'll send you all the details about coaching, about how it works. One thing I will not be able to tell you, I will not be able to tell you where we are going because I'm living basically week by week because things change very fast, and this will be a hardcore trip where we will simply go to any place that's open and has hot girls. And now, guys, here is my conversation with Dr. Jack.
I don't give a fuck, man. So, okay, we're rolling. You're rolling.
Dr. Jack, Dr.
Beautiful.
Jack, Dr. Jack. There was a song like that.
Yeah, there is a song.
Cheers.
Well,
About Dr.
I
Jack.
know little about music either, so I guess there will be one. Cool. What are we doing here?
We are sitting in Mario's apartment. Mario, say hi. Say hi.
What's up, fellas?
Loud enough so that everyone hears you. Mario is a known character on my podcast. So, hello guys and welcome to St. Robert's Daygame Pickup Podcast, where I'm sitting with Dr. Jack in the lovely island of Malta, where me and Mario went cliff diving today, and now we're finally drinking some beers and some champagne. How has Malta treated you, Jack?
It's actually been quite nice. A reset in many ways at the level of physiology and psychology. I also got totally battered with a complete psycho a couple of days ago. I ended up naked on the street, extremely high, and I had to crawl down back to where I lay my bones and eventually passed out. So it's been absolutely beautiful.
So the question that I had as the last one was, hey, tell the story about the chick, naked, like a photo of a naked chick on the street. So tell the story. It was like the last story I wanted to talk, but let's start with that.
But I mean, that was pretty standard. Nothing too out of the ordinary or nothing too science fiction like. But yeah, Tinder. So all right, how's it going? Actually, I'll share with you how she opened the conversation, which, you know, those are my favorite conversations. And I liked the language immediately. I was like, I think there's potential here.
Oh, she just says, "Love your fucking pictures, fucking same," and also.
Yeah, no, pretty easy. By the fifth message or so, it was like, all right, let's make this happen. And then, so what kind of porno do you do? She asked.
Oh, she was basically saying, "Fuck me." What way are you gonna fuck me?
But she did not go into details immediately. She just made it quite explicit that this had to happen as soon as possible. And I guess I just had to pull off the logistics to be in the right time, the right place, which actually took a few days because she works every day.
Don't say where she works though.
No, every day until the late. And it's like an office job kind of thing. So she's busy with her mind and she has to wake up early. So we never could make it match. And then one night she was like, I'm with my friends, my female friends, having beers. Can you join? I was like, yeah, I'll just join. So I showed up. It was all with all of them, and they're all speaking Spanish. And I can actually speak Spanish. Horrible Spanish. Learned mostly around South America.
Una cerveza, por favor.
Yeah, or dos, or no cervezas, because I'm not a big fan anyway. But yeah, and that's how I learned most of my Spanish, was to source narcotics and sex that was not going to kill me across most of the southern hemisphere in Mexico. But apparently that's colloquial enough, and I could be communicative and almost kind of charming enough with these girls. And then they all fucked off, and only the one remained. And she proceeded to be very demanding at the level of altering our neurochemistry with narcotics. And so I was like, all right, when in Rome, I guess. And they just went on with her exuberance. And she went to make a bunch of phone calls. She knew everybody, and she did it all. She sourced the thing. I just had to stay there and stare at the sky.
So now you know a chemist.
No, she does. I delegated everything.
Very good.
Because I'm
happy to hear that.
I'm not usually one to partake in illicit activities. You know, if anything,
of course you're not.
If I ever have to get swallowed into these kind of situations, I let everyone else deal with it. And then I may open up my physiology to whatever comes my way. But that's I guess a different story. And so eventually we just went to her place and we got quite altered. And then we just ended up entering the most disgusting fluid exchanges that we could possibly master and engineer. And then we ended up naked in the streets, which with lockdown and the COVID pandemic, it brings some kind of joy and warmth to the heart to be able to witness this kind of thing.
She seemed very happy. You seemed very happy. You both were smiling.
It was beautiful. It was a moment of connection.
Blissful moment.
Exactly. The only thing that could have made it even better would have been actual COVID. But I got it like a few months ago, so unfortunately I popped that cherry. But yeah.
By the way, I remember you telling the story about your hotel room when you were isolated
Oh
and
yeah,
the red
quarantine.
lights and what was the story there? Because I didn't quite get it.
Well, so I travelled from Johannesburg, South Africa, to Melbourne, Australia, via Doha.
By a
And
what?
Qatar.
Oh,
Doha. Yeah, and it was quite surreal. It was all locked up, and I was traveling business, so I had access to the lounge, which was deserted, and the lounge in Doha is like basically the size of an airport anywhere else. It's huge. It's got multiple levels and this pool and showers and things, and there were just like a few people. But over there, I had showers, I touched everything, I ate nibbles, so there was some exposure. I actually have no idea when that happened, but I was engaged on a quite carnal level with a local girl in Johannesburg, and then she went on to get tested and tested out negative. So I know that I got it after kissing goodbye to her on the way to the airport.
Yeah.
So it either was at Johannesburg airport or in Doha, the business lounge, or on the fucking planes. But on the planes, I had my own double room, closed doors. So I don't know, I guess the particles can be in the air. Or, anyway, I fucking got it, right? Got to Melbourne, they swabbed me, and then they sent me to a 5-star hotel because the approach of Australia when it comes down to containing the virus, it's actually quite hilarious. I can only really liken it to like an old lady, a very rich old lady that goes to like the car garage to get her car fixed because something broke down, and just throws a bunch of cash at the dude and says, just fix it, make it go away, whatever, it's not working, right? That kind of thing, right? So they just rented a bunch of 5-star hotels and they send all the incoming travelers there, right? So I was like, oh, that's fine. And I was overlooking the whole of Melbourne on the 13th
Can you
floor.
move here? Because he likes looking at you and me, and when he turns the head, I know the audio is like changing in the recording. The sometimes will be quiet so that
All right,
he sees you.
whatever. So anyway, I was actually loving life, right? Because this is like a $500 a night fucking hotel with like the pool in front of like the glass window kind of thing. I was like, I think I could stay here for 2 weeks, right? It could be worse. It could be a lot worse. And they were feeding me the worst foods you can imagine, right? Because that's the common practices around nutrition in most countries are those of just feeding you the standard American diet, even if you're not in fucking America. So I was eating like chips and pasta and Coca-Cola, all the things I would avoid at all costs. And then on the third day, I got a call and was like, hey, you are positive. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, yeah, what do you mean I'm positive? You are positive. Yeah, you're going to be transferred to alternative facilities. And I was like, what do you mean alternative? I'm pretty okay here. No, they moved me out. But when I said they moved me out, it was like the films, people in gowns, put everything in plastic bags, and then they moved me to the infested hotel, right? Where there was just like infected
Everyone
people.
else go with there.
It's like a Resident Evil game, right? Everybody is infected with one of the most notorious viruses in modern history, right?
Dogs are turning to zombies.
Pretty much. And so I get chucked into this horrible room at first. Then I lodged a complaint because they were checking in on my mental health every few hours, right? And I was like, this is terrible for my mental health. This room is terrible. You moved from a 5-star hotel to this shithole. I have a lower back injury. I need warm water. I need a bathtub, right? I was like, oh, okay. And so I give you a few hours and they moved me to the only room in the whole hotel with a bathtub, which was like a very strange room because it was like pretty big and they had like a living room and then this jacuzzi room, right? With just a jacuzzi, like a pretty big one, like 5 people could fit.
Residential suite.
It was a presentation, but this hotel wasn't 5-star by any means. It was like a weird hotel, like a 3-star plus, right? And then there's this strange room, which was pretty much like a Japanese love hotel room. That kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever been to a Japanese love hotel.
I've watched the YouTube videos
they're
of
weird.
Japan, yeah.
Like they are kind of strange. The architecture is all warped and stuff. That's where I stayed for like 11 days. And
so how did you get to the red lights?
I carry the red lights. It's like a medical device for your skin. It's like red light therapy. Because I'm well versed in biology and things. So I try to take care of myself. So I had a medical red light therapy machine. Kit. in quarantine, right? So I was just treating myself with jacuzzi, red light, and trying not to plunge the red light into the jacuzzi. Otherwise, that could have been uncomfortable, let's say, the level of biology. But let's say it was okay. The quarantine was okay. And still weird, but I actually managed to weather the COVID story quite, I could survey all my symptoms, and and I was mostly fucked up in the mind, really. My airways were fine. I posted videos every day on my social to update my friends and family, even though they don't speak really, English or whatever. I was like, yeah.
So we're not gonna dig deeper in the red light story today.
No,
Okay.
I think that will do anyway. Yeah, let's move on to it.
Okay.
That was me. COVID was great.
COVID was great.
I had a great time with COVID. And
even though you have managed to have a crazy adventure in Malta with this tattooed, beautiful, crazy chick, you've managed to survive COVID. You're actually a smart dude.
I try.
Let's not go over like all the degrees you have.
Yeah.
But because that would kind of out you too much.
I guess
we want to keep this at least a little bit anonymous. But you have a PhD.
I have a PhD. Yeah.
Like a few other degrees.
Yeah, I have a degree as well. It's hard to have just a PhD and not a degree. I could not pull that off. Like, I also have a degrry. Yes.
I guess you would
quite
have
a good degree.
Your sugar baby skills must have had been on like a whole new level to get straight to the PhD.
100%. Like no, I actually just still went through the degree level, but I did not do a master though. So that's my hack.
How wait, what? Don't you have to go through a master?
No, because I did it a better way. I worked in a pharmaceutical industry for a year. So that counted as master. In fact, it's better than master because you're having hands-on experience in a real laboratory conditions. It's not like master in a university, which can be a little bit more removed from the thing, right? So, and then the PhD. So yeah, I have a few qualifications, I guess.
Yeah, I've also heard that you were a hard student. Like that's when we met. That's the thing I found very interesting about you. You are this like degenerate psychonaut, pretty much. That on one side of the coin, but you are an extremely smart and educated, and like you know how to get shit done, and you do very different things in your life. So you have these two sides to your life, which I found from the moment we met, or like an hour in. I found it very fascinating, and that's why it was very interesting for me to talk to you. And that's why it's interesting to me, like to have this chat about the degenerate part of your life. But I know you were like a proper geek when you were studying for your PhD, writing your PhD. Like
I guess PhD is pretty geeky by definition.
But
you don't really finish it if you don't have that side of you dialed in.
Yeah, I mean, and when you said about the stuff you did when you were in high school, how you had crazy high scores when graduating, that's incredible. So you must have a side where you can sit down and grind it out and love that part of your life, love the geekiness and digging in the serious side of life, not just because a lot of people. This is what fascinates and what I love about people, and what I view as the best way to approach life is a lot of people have just the crazy geeky serious side of their life. They're crazy driven, and that's all they do.
Right.
And the other side of the spectrum, you have the crazy degenerates who just do all the psychedelics, they do all the coke and all the other drugs that they can get their hands on, and most often those people aren't
detached.
Yes, they're like two completely different types of people.
They specialize.
Yes, and those crazy achievers, like in the business world, who do coke a lot, I don't think of them as the smart people. I don't think of them as the smart people.
Yeah.
I think of them as
they specialize the money game or whatever task that they manage to dial in quite well to be good at what they do.
Yes.
But that's still not intelligence. That's just
yes. I don't think it's an interesting way to live your life, whereas you have both sides of the coin, which is interesting. So given that you were such a geek and such a hard studier, can you tell us how you graduated?
No, the funny thing is that I've always been like this.
Yeah.
In fact, I started more from the degenerate side of things, but for some reason, I've always been a degenerate with a strange twist, because people always treated me with some kind of intellectual respect, even though I did not quite do anything overtly intellectual. I was kind of a rebel and breaking things, or just not going to school, or being kind of vulgar. But for some reason, people trusted my opinion in things, even though I was always kind of unconventional. So I don't really know what kind of judgment they placed on me back then. You'd have to ask them. But then eventually, by the end of my high school time, I realized there was the high potential for me to completely ruin my life thereafter. And I had some examples in my family where some of the people in my family, cousins and whatnot, or they kind of relegated themselves to the working class, and they never really shown at the level of establishing themselves professionally. So I had that placeholder that it could have gone really wrong. It was a tangible possibility. But at the same time, I understood life in a way that seemed to be, in some respects, respected by some people I trusted. So maybe I should do something about it. And that's when I kind of freaked out at the end of my high school and managed to really crack the high school game. And then eventually even leave Italy altogether and become quite established with my academic journey afterwards. But what you said is very important, that of being a multifaceted individual. It's something I actually saw in myself quite early, where I could really picture myself as an inner community of different characters, which are actually quite specialized in their own way, but they're all within me. So I could be diversified while embodying at any given time, like a switchboard, different personalities that, taken in isolation, would be quite specialized. So I've always been kind of like colorful in my language or my behavior, but then when there was some linear problem solving to be applied, then I could do it as well, right? If it was something I loved. So that's another thing. The rebellious side of me made sure that the geeky side of me could only be trapped in activities that made the rebellious side happy, meaning the fun ones, the ones, certain themes of inquiry into what it is to approach intellect or exploration or adventure. And so the two sides kind of kept each other's in check, so that the geeky side could empower the rebellious side to actually harness resources, professional relationships, not die, all these basic things. While also the rebellious side made sure that the geeky part would not become impossible to fuck, or completely, removed from a certain level of social skills, a certain level of abilities to party or to connect with people on a level that wouldn't be the most sanctioned academic side of things.
So let's dig in here a little bit. This is actually interesting, and I think a lot of guys would love us. Like, if I didn't explore this a little bit more, I would get a lot of questions. So just for you, and I know you are in a way very artistic, and when you talk, you're very fluid, and you're deep in what you're saying, but to someone listening, they could be like, oh, this guy's all over the place.
Right.
So let me ask you some concrete fucking questions. So
Go for it.
what were a few ways that helped you most or come to mind? Three or more, that the serious geeky side kept the rebellious side in check, made sure you don't go full retard.
Right, okay. I realized quite early in my journey the power of altered states, right? Altered states is an umbrella term for practices that can bring your ego down, or the intensity of the experience can be overwhelming in a way that can destabilize your mind. This can be things like skydiving, can be things like sex, can be things like near-death experiences. It can be things like, I don't know, fight or psychedelic substances.
Can you give me the beer so that you can finish the champagne and I'll just grab a beer? Okay. I'm fine with that.
Psychedelic substances.
Yeah, by the way, we can talk anything on this podcast. There's like no limits on my side. Like I talk drugs all the time. So
the point is that I had an early and privileged access into how wild the mind could go, which is quite aesthetic, also terrifying, but it also kind of prodded the curiosity of the geek as well. Because when you are exposed to such a wide variety of versions of how reality can look like, feel like, sound like, then how do you differentiate what's real and what's not? How do you validate your experience? And this has basically become an obsession for me, to try to work out a way to tap into the colorful opportunities that altered states can provide, while also keeping a firm relationship with some kind of reduction of noise to signal ratio, meaning trying to work out what could actually be a valid way to see the world versus erroneous simulations or noise or hallucinations, right? And this is what I eventually went on to ascribe into living a psychedelic life. So you treat anything you do like a psychedelic trip, so that you can try to validate experiences, relationships, professional interactions, money, adventure, nature, in a way that can in some ways provide an enrichment in prediction models, in ways to learn, in ways to use your body, mind, and passion to create friendship, relationships, professional engagements. All these things can be built and approached in countless ways. How do you make sure that you select for the best ones? How do you manage to select the ones that are most efficient and most effective in a sea of potential alternatives? This is the kind of things that you would be exposed to non-stop during a psychedelic trip. But it's too much. Or when you dream, for instance, then in the morning you forget most of it. So this is why the geeky side of it realized that there were very powerful ways to optimize problem solving to get from A to B. But then the psychonaut, became better at realizing which A's to pick and which B's to pick to then optimize through linear problem solving. Because if you don't really know where you are or where you want to go, there's just so much geekiness you can throw into it. You're not going to get anywhere. And that level of path finding requires superior creativity, which requires a certain level of flexibility for the mind and the heart and the body, I guess, that being just an engineer cannot really provide.
So how do I, putting a pause on the question about three ways, how do I got very taken away by the idea that you treat different realities of your life as a psychedelic trip.
Right.
So let's say we went cliff diving today.
Right.
With Mario. So can you explain to me, as an absolute idiot with an IQ probably quite lower than yours, because sometimes when you talk I get lost, like I'm dumb as fuck in a way, like I'm not dumb but in a ways I am. So can you explain me in a layman's terms, right, how do I take a cliff dive and turn it into a psychedelic experience? Like how do I get, so I've done LSD a few times, how do I get the same shit I got out of LSD, or maybe not the same but similar, out of a cliff dive?
Right. You could use a cliff dive as a tool to destabilize your mind. So let's say you have certain problems in life, like, you are unsure which one of two different girls to pursue, if you don't have time for both of them at the same time, or whether to push in a certain business direction or another, or whether to get breast surgery or not, or the usual problems that anyone would have at some point. Then you can try to journal as extensively as you can before the cliff dive, and then use the cliff dive while thinking about these individual issues, to use that specific rush of adrenaline and the impact, the acceleration, the abrupt change in temperature as an injection of entropy.
Oh, it's like, sorry, but like, so it's basically just as I prepare for the trip. Also, what is this trip about? I make it like an intent. What am I going? What do I want to solve?
Setting, right?
So I get to the edge of the cliff. I'm fucking scared, and then I take the dive, and I dive. I come back out. I swim out, and there is like a tide, and it's hard to get out. I get out, and then I get back to my journal after the trip, and I think, okay, what happened? What did I learn? How do I integrate it in my life? Is this what you mean?
Yeah, so you can try to force a certain mental landscape on the scaffold that is the cliff dive. So that, because even during the trip, right? During a psychedelic trip, there's drugs in your system, you're seeing colors and things, and then you may be thinking about, your dad, or you could be thinking about, horse riding, or, doing the degrees as opposed to the other degree. These are all things that you are merging with something that is external to these loops, the psychedelic trip. In many ways, the cliff dive is its own drug. It's its own psychedelic.
Especially if you haven't done it before.
Exactly. So in this way, you can use the cliff dive almost as like a meditative tool / enforced altered state to manipulate your decision process.
Where you're observing yourself throughout the before, during, and after the process.
Before, during, and after.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So,
look at it.
This is how even, some professional surfers, they're not just surfing. Sometimes they use surfing as some kind of soil which they plant ideas in. They say when they are in the flow of the surf and there's like the roll, of the wave going around, they get all these insights about where their life should go. Problems that before, when they were at the table, right, just squeezing their brain, trying to find solutions, they just couldn't get anywhere. But now the context of using their bodies in a certain way, the audio-visual stimulations, and the fact that there's risks, all these things actually unlock certain blockages in the mind.
I can actually see a lot of things similar to like an activity that you partake in for maybe not the first time, but it's a big activity. You mentioned relationships as well. It could also be something similar.
100%.
Or like the same thing about cliff dive or skydiving. I think an interesting idea would be to do an experience that's longer than 2 seconds, which is like a short cliff dive. It's like apart from being scared and then fuck this. Because my approach whenever I do something scary, as with the cliff dive today, I just stand there and it's not that high. I'm like, well, fuck this, I'm gonna do this anyway, so I might as well jump. Like, so I don't give a fuck.
I mean, there's a difference between a full psychedelic trip and just a microdose, right? The same thing goes with
I think it's more about psychedelic trip. So you might talk about, let's say, it depends on the substance. You might talk about LSD, or you might talk about mushrooms, which the experiences are very different, but in a way similar. I don't know why people say they're the same, but I've only done mushrooms once for fucking real.
They're definitely not the same.
They're very different. Like mushrooms is way more like an inner trip and much less visual, whereas LSD is a lot of visuals. That's just my very limited experience. LSD for me has been much more visual and much less inner trip. So
Okay.
I'm like, if I basically, when I took mushrooms for the first time, my first thought in the morning, next day, was like, I'm not doing this shit for a while. And after LSD, was like, when can I do this again?
I've heard this many times before. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I mean is, I don't think it's about the dose of the substance. It's about the duration of the experience. So LSD is like, have like more than 10 hours of the experience, whereas mushrooms you have like 4, and whereas another substance you might have 20 minutes of the same intensity of an experience. And so you can do a cliff dive, you can do a skydive, or you can do a relationship. 3 scary, weird things that always end in a
You
disaster.
could try to merge them even in one activity and
Yeah. Oh.
level up.
Yeah. Now again, you see why we should have done some other substances while doing this interview. Definitely. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So it's a form of like mindfulness applied to cliff diving, right? When you basically use any kind of experience as a tool to reverse engineer your mind, reverse engineer your decision process, your goal setting, your value system, the epistemology of how you know what you know. Basically, observing the world from a far more intentional point of view, instead of just
Yes.
being a bystander of your own life.
So that's tool number 1 your geek used to make sure your, what did we call it? We didn't call it degenerate side. You get a better term for it.
The more artistic side,
Artistic
most
sounds
fucked
too
up side.
PC. Like, let's call it degenerate, whatever. You find
Degenerate,
Yeah. So
yeah.
that was what other ways did you have to keep, so for your geeky side, to keep your degenerate
Oh,
side
that's
in
easy.
check, to make sure you don't die?
That's super easy. Like, if you just leave the degenerate to do whatever the degenerate wants to do, lifespan would shrink massively.
A
A lot.
Yes.
And that's why, the degenerate is very good at doing these kind of things. In very colorful ways. But then, for instance, the degenerate eventually often runs out of money, right? With less money, less opportunity to do crazy shit, right? So the geek comes to the rescue to do things that would resolve problems in such market or such market to bring revenue streams in. And but then the degenerate brings in more character for the geek to provide value in ways that would be more innovative.
Yes.
Right? So they help each other's out, but in a way that's actually grounding for both, and it's nourishing for both. Also because the geek, in many ways, can amass more traditional resources, meaning human resources, money, or let's say government support at the level of like being able to travel to such country. You need documents sometimes, or passports, or you need to have had some kind of command over paperwork to even be able to do certain things. You can't just go to places. Sometimes you need some kind of logistical mind. But then the reckless, the degenerate, can find better ways or more interesting ways to travel in a way that can be remembered more incredible adventures, all sorts of things. But also, one of the most meaningful ways I've seen them helping each other's out is that the degenerate in some ways needs the geek for the resources, but the geek needs the degenerate for the inspiration. So, and in some ways, they make each other's a lot stronger, because let's say that the geek needs certain outputs to be validated, and the degenerate needs contexts and needs resources. So what happens is that, let's say the geek is a scientist or an engineer, right? Or both. Or, I don't know, it's an accountant or it's a lawyer, whatever that is, right? Linear problem solving. The thing is to be good at that kind of thing, you need motivation, right? Why would you want to be extraordinary at any kind of potentially boring activity? What would fuel becoming a very good geek, right? Sometimes the geeks do that because they think that making a lot of money is the only way they're going to find love, right?
You at one point realize it doesn't work like that, Mario.
No, right. No, it doesn't. No, for some people, that's the best they can get, right? Because then, whatever, consider that they never fuck, right? If you get enough money, you can literally order your wife, mail order brides from Russia or the Philippines, or I'm not going to generalize here, right? Whatever. So you're just going to be like, I'm going to fucking buy my wife, right? I've got the cash, so you're going to get at least for some periods of time something that resembles sex, right? So, there is some actual output there that can be engineered from a purely geeky mind.
Unfortunately,
right?
It doesn't include raccoons, though.
I mean, it doesn't include what?
Raccoons.
Raccoons. No, but where there's will, there's ways, even for raccoons.
Such an inside joke.
I know, it is. It really is. So the point is that, like as a geek, you want to get certain things in life that sometimes are even within your blind spots, right? Sometimes you want status. But actually, the reason why you want status is, again, because you want love, or you want friends, or you want some kind of like more whimsical support than just the status, right? So you use that as a currency. But point is that sometimes, like, the geek needs to produce for whatever reason. But then the degenerate really wants to be a degenerate. So he wants to push it as far as it possibly can into a certain colorful way to experience the world. It can be through, strange activities, or sex, or drugs, or I don't know, flamboyant themes, right? But in order to do that, the degenerate needs also resources, needs intellect, because a genius degenerate can go really far. But then you also need some kind of resources. So the degenerate would bring a lot of colorful ways to see the world. But then, for the degenerate to also be a geek, it cannot just be a normal geek, because usually geeks are surrounded by other geeks, and geeks get really uncomfortable really fast and really easily. Meaning that if you are a strange geek, you usually are shot down by the establishment. The other geeks, they're like, this is a strange person, gets us uncomfortable. We don't like strange people in general. So the other geeks usually get confronted by degenerate people. So that's why they are in bubbles. They are protected by the laboratory, or the office, or wherever they live.
So the geeky side lets the degenerate side lets the geek get out in more with different people. Like, instead of just being around other geeks, it lets you network with all different types of people. It gets you access to conferences. Like, you travel around the world going to weird conferences on different topics, and that's the degenerate side, is getting the feet in the geek world.
Exactly.
Oh, that's
but that's not the point I was making. That's part of it. But the point that I was making is that the more a geek becomes degenerate, the more it becomes vulnerable to be killed off by the other geeks. Because the other geeks like to reduce uncertainty. They like to know what they're dealing with. They don't want strange people in their life. Geeks hate strange people. They are highly introverted. So they want to have a very controlled environment. They don't want their insecurities to be exposed. They don't want to even be put in any sexual context, because it makes them feel really insecure and really triggered. So geeks hang out with other geeks. talking about very predictable things, usually about work, or sometimes they get drunk, but they don't do anything particularly strange, right?
They talk about the pickup books they have read, but the approaches they haven't done.
Exactly, right? So they have a very voyeuristic way to see the world. Or maybe they talk about films, some crazy film they watch,
Yes.
but it's very intellectual, it's very removed from direct experience. So whenever somebody that is degenerate appears amongst the geeks either leave or they try to belittle the degenerate, saying, you are stupid, you don't understand the world, you don't even have a degree, like they use their intellect to protect themselves from their own befallings by belittling the degenerates' successes.
It really reminds me a lot about what's happening in our community in the seduction and dating world. There are guys who have read all the books and they know all the theory and they love talking about it while they're not taking enough action. But when someone comes in and says, hey, this happened, I had this experience and this got me these results, he's going out, he's getting results. Yeah. And the geeks say, then the geeks start analyzing what he did with their very logical opinions, yeah, which have nothing to do with how things really work and are purely theoretical with zero kind of street credit to back it up.
Yes, but now I'm not talking about that. That is about the technical sides of it. I'm talking about the moral sides of it.
The moral sides.
I'm talking about the fact that geeks get uncomfortable with strange things that lesion their own self-esteem, their understanding of what's right or good and evil about the world.
Yes.
Right? So they don't want to talk about kink. They don't want to talk about strange sexual interactions unless they're talking about something completely far removed and they've had a few beers. They just don't want to hear about any of this. They don't want to
like Japanese.
Exactly. They want, even if you dress a certain way, they would just want to either talk bad about you. They would, try to remove you from their community. So whenever you bring something that isn't geeky into a geeky world, they see it as confronting. They see it as shameful. They see it as disgusting. They see it as wrong. They see it as just, I don't want to see. I don't want to be in, this person makes me uncomfortable. Take this person away from my eyes, right? It's that kind of thing. Because of moral reasons.
Yes.
So from that point of view, to breach that moral barrier, you need to bring in the language of the geeks. Meaning, if you are better at them at being geeks,
on your subject,
on their subjects,
on their subjects,
if you can be a better geek than them, then you also can afford being weird because they respect you because of your geeky talents.
Yes.
Okay. When you become a very good geek, then the geeks listen because you're speaking their language. So if you can bring in your weird side, then you're not just a degenerate. The language changes. How you become like the mad scientist, or the bohemian writer, the Oscar Wilde, that kind of stuff.
Wait,
right?
I finally got what we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes. Give me a 1 minute break. Otherwise, I've been wanting to take a leak for the last 5 minutes.
Just piss yourself, right? If
you're an amazing, concentrate really hard to understand
if you're an amazing pickup artist, you can even pull off being pissed on yourself, and everybody will say, "Look how liberated a pickup artist is. They can just piss himself and keep a conversation going."
We were cliff diving today, and as we were leaving, these two chicks arrive, and Mario says, you know what a real pickup artist would do? We would walk up to them and we would shut them up.
And piss on them. And they would be totally
it was about
fine.
the gangbang we had right there in the clips, but we settled on just chatting with them and getting their contacts, but yeah, that didn't go anywhere.
I get it.
So in the geek world, you can come in as a degenerate geek if you're a better geek than they are.
So you need to become a super geek.
Okay.
And if you become a super geek, then the degenerate can merge with the geek, and the other geeks accept it because you proved your privilege to bring other sides in, because the extra output and the extra performance and the geekiness makes them make a compromise at the moral level. They say, hey, all this other shit makes me uncomfortable, but I want the extra geekiness and this person has.
But maybe they start accepting not in a negative way, accepting as in, okay, he's weird, but that's fine, we will compromise. But maybe they start being curious about your degenerate side because of how superior of a geek you are.
Precisely. So the extra geekiness makes them think, if this person managed to excel on this side of the human experience that we respect, it means that these all other shit that we don't understand may actually be part of the success itself. And so we should change our mind.
So we should trip.
Yeah, or whatever that is, or that they don't like, right? So you actually don't go against them. You don't work against the way they are. You work with the way they are.
Okay.
And actually provide a way that provides value for everybody involved.
I see this as like so I asked you about 3 things the geek gonna keep the degenerate from dying, and the second one was, what was the first one? I remember the second one was the geek gives the resources, because
Yes.
you can't just be a degenerate, and the third is
Then the degenerate provides the innovation, provides the imagination. But then the third is what I just described, is that they make each other stronger, because also the degenerate, right? On the degenerate side of things, you can be super degenerate, right? And you can be like, let's fucking, like get drunk and skydive at the same time. Or, like, let's try to make love with a crocodile, right? Or let's try to run naked in front of a police station. The degenerate can come up with anything. However, the degenerate also needs very often help from other people or society to get degenerate things done, right? At the logistical level, the degenerate cannot just be a complete mess of mind, right? Because otherwise you're just in your own mind having a psychotic episode, and that's not being a degenerate, that's just being mad, right? So for a degenerate to be a functional degenerate, he also needs to get something done, right? So the geek kind of helps the degenerate get from degenerate A to degenerate B, right? That level of problem solving that also the degenerate needs. But for the degenerate to command a certain level of cooperation from other people, it needs to have some kind of credit. It needs to have some kind of credibility. And that's where the geek comes into in the help of the degenerate. Because if you're just a complete degenerate and you are trying to inspire people to take risks, then these people are going to survey your ability to not get them killed, not get them arrested, or some kind of contingency measures for them to be able to go through the risk-taking gambit. And when you have a very strong geek by your side, then people can feel more acceptably vulnerable in getting the weird side out, because they know that they are not just in the presence of a degenerate, they're also in the presence of an established geek. So they know that the risks are being surveyed and analyzed from some level of grounded embodiment of pattern recognition, of knowledge, of wisdom, whatever that is, that are the treasures that the geek brings with him. So that the degenerate can really push it much further, because it comes in the presence of someone that is canonically associated with stability, with reliability, with responsibility.
So since my next question is very, very also on a serious side, just as the stuff we've been talking about, let's kind of make this a little bit lighter with just a story. And since you were talking about different experiences and being naked in front of police station,
Right.
let's talk about what happened in Cambodia.
Well, fuck, Cambodia.
What?
Cambodia was a special one. Cambodia was a special one. One for which I am still apologizing for the local community. and to hurt their feelings, I guess. But
Their eyes, most of them.
many of them,
and maybe some pride of the men.
many of them were actually laughing their balls off. So I guess it's a mixed model. But for the ones that were deeply hurt, I guess I can offer my my sorrows. But yeah, I was in a very stressful time of my PhD, which they're usually very stressful all throughout. And I had my own strategies that the Degenerate gifted me of letting some steam off from all this bottled up stress that a deep cognitive work usually brings with.
Yes.
To get lost in extremely colorful countries or self-proclaimed territories around the world and do the most bizarre things that the Degenerate could think of with the help of the geek, not to die shortly thereafter. So one of such was to befriend an ex-model from Finland and become extremely promiscuous with her, and then travel for half a day around the countryside naked on motorbikes, which is something we quickly learned is not part of traditional Cambodian customs. And then, yeah, basically there was a naked police chase that lasted for a while. We thought we could get away with it because we had very fast road bikes. We were terribly wrong. So eventually the authorities caught up with us, beat us up, and forced us to put some kind of clothes on. It was quite graphic and quite intense.
First question before we go further is, was there, and if yes, then what exactly, was there any substances involved?
Zero.
For real?
We were not even on a coffee.
Damn.
This was just...
You guys are weird as fuck.
That's what I mean, right? That we meant it.
I thought you must have been in a really crazy space in your head to go to that.
No, but you don't understand. I am in that crazy space most of the time. Sometimes I have deployed psychedelics to bring some kind of psychochemical context to my already very weird mind.
Okay.
You know, instead, but when I'm sober, these kind of things are there just as much, right? And in that context, there was the sun, there was my relationship with her, there was the fact that I just exited months of very stressful times at university. So I was just like, whatever, you know, you only live once, and I have motorbikes, we don't need clothes, we don't need anything, we're free, that kind of thing, right? And yeah, and it worked out, I guess, until it didn't.
So you ended up in a Cambodian prison.
We did. We were held captive for several days.
So how long did you spend there?
3 days, 3 full days.
Do you have a selfie from Cambodia prison?
Potentially, but it cannot be conveyed through voice. But yeah, I guess a lot more. I'm not sure can be really described on a semi-public forum happened in prison. But you know,
you're anonymous here.
I know, but you know, like what happens in prison usually stays in prison.
You can.
So I want to leave some bohemian charm.
So you got fucked in the ass by 7 Cambodian men. Is
guess,
what you're saying?
I guess this may have happened. I don't know. There are many more things may have happened in prison, but
okay.
You know, this is the level of
openness you're willing to.
I mean, you know, like prison is a magical place that deserves a certain level of sacredness, and but let's say that the prison was as colorful as anyone can imagine a Cambodian prison to be, in ways that probably were not even foreseen as much. But then eventually the authorities were kind enough to let us leave and return to our home countries
and never come back.
And
never come back.
And potentially never come back, but we will find out if that is the case or not. We were never given an official notice of any kind, and there's rumors that
the article I read said you are not welcome in Cambodia ever again.
Yeah, but journalists, right? What do they really know? we were never really handed in any kind of official. We never went to court, any of that
So
stuff.
there will be no official statement to what happened in the prison.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean,
Okay, let's
people
move on.
can
This
imagine.
is
People
fine
can,
enough. This
yeah.
is fine enough. Okay, this is already good enough. So let's get back to the serious topic, and this is something I'm asking for myself because I definitely have a big like I have a degenerate side, and I have like a serious side. What I struggle with is that
We just get messages real time from degenerate
is that the
German
same?
girls. No, this is a crazy German girl that on Tinder started the conversation with literally just like, let's fuck right now. And she sends me photos as well. All right. Okay.
Those are some very nice tits.
No,
I
she
must
is
admit.
all right. Oh no. Okay, let's go. Wanna fuck, babe? All right. This is how the conversation starters I cherish the most. I'm in Malta. See?
She has ginormous,
Fuck,
very
babe.
beautiful tits. Very nice tits.
That's wonderful. I'm in Malta. But you compel me to return to Deutschland soon.
Heil Rammstein. Yeah.
In fact, I'll be in Munich tomorrow, which is actually true.
Oh shit.
So I may just swing by Hanover, get this fuck over and done with, and then carry on with my COVID-laden journey. Anyway, yeah, carry on. I just got intruded by savage females.
Okay. So my question is, I have both sides, but if I let myself have a beer or smoke weed or
Yep.
whatever, then and I feel it's a biochemistry thing where I wake up the next day and I'm tired and lazy and I don't get shit done.
Yeah.
And if
Why do you think that's the case?
Biochemistry.
Yeah, but I have done some of my most extraordinary feats of mind, extremely
No,
intoxicating.
that's you. But you
Ah,
as
okay.
a scientist understand that there are things that work for one person, but you might be an exception.
There's some people that smoke weed before doing martial arts or going to the
I
gym.
could never do that.
Well,
when I smoke weed, I was like,
I'm useless.
Yeah, I'm useless as well most of the time. So, how do you do you think it's like you being an exception who can be such a degenerate and so productive at the same time, or are there some tools? Are there any tools that you found, or rather that you have learned help you still be productive while having all these psychedelic and different experiences with altered consciousness, states of consciousness, etc. So, are there any things you learned that help you?
Well, this is an extraordinary question, one that gets thrown my way very often.
Of course.
And I don't necessarily have an answer. My life has been that of an outlier ever since I can remember, and others could attest, I guess, that I've known me for longer than most, if anything. Yeah, about over 20 years, which is creepy. So I'm not necessarily representative of the bulk of.
So do you think it's like a genetic thing, you being an outlier, or?
I don't know, right? Because there's a handful of people in my family that are colorful. But I guess you could find colorful people in almost any family, right? I think I am a product of a very specific cultural environment. Also, my hometown is a party town, right? So people go where I was born to let loose, or to become intoxicated, or to party, or to dance. And so I've been exposed ever since I was a child with a certain colorful way to do things. But also I wasn't, on some kind of party beach town in a developing country where you also only see the degenerate side of things. I was in a highly developed country with a rich history of engineering, of the arts, of education. So I kind of had the support network of getting shit done with also the colorful side of the party environment to witness all the time. So then I'm like, but then, many other people I know grew up in the same conditions and never really got. So there must be something within me that I just
So it's not
don't
something
really
you
understand.
had to work, consciously find solutions for.
It's always been there.
Okay, yeah.
Like this
it
element
was
of
like,
weird has always been there.
Okay.
Then it just became sophisticated increasingly more over time, but it's
Okay.
kind of always been there. Yeah.
So since we are, well, honestly, since we have so many topics to talk about, and I find this conversation so interesting, I'll just go to the topics that are most interesting for me, so that we don't sit here until 1 a.m., which is totally doable if we get more beers
Do it.
on steaks. Let's talk about the subject that's very interesting for me and for not many but several of the listeners, and I'm doing this exclusively for me and for the guys that this is interesting for, and I know that we have a lot of degenerates in our group. So let's talk drugs.
Please.
This is a big topic for me. I've done mushrooms once, and the story was mushrooms were old. I didn't know how old they were, so we weren't sure about the potency. I took 5 grams. Then an hour later, I took 10 more, and I don't know. I think I still knew who I was. I had crazy experiences with like not understanding where my body is with eyes closed. Like it was like all over the room, so it had a weird feeling. But I like there was no ego death, no nothing. I've done LSD like for real, apart from like smaller doses, like 50 micrograms, which is like bullshit. I did it with a girl I was dating just to give her that experience. But so I've done LSD twice. Once I did, well, you never know exactly how much is on a tab, even they say that this is what it is. But I did a 200 tab, and I've done like 240, 260, something like that. Let's say 250. And both of those experiences were fucking amazing visually, and those experiences were amazing, but I never... So for me, the psychedelics, when I take a tab of LSD and when I put it under my tongue, what I'm saying to myself is, okay, wherever this takes me, let's go. And that's my attitude. Because
fuck it.
Not fuck it. Not fuck it. It's not fuck it. The first time I took mushrooms, for example, my friend told me, he was the one who was sitting for me, and he said, be ready for 4 worst hours of your life. Most likely you will have 4 best hours of your life. And since then, that's how I view psychedelic trips.
Yep.
Be ready for the worst, and if you're not ready for that, then don't take it.
No.
And I've had just amazing trips. I never had a bad trip. So I've never had an ego death, whatever that means. I've always had very pleasant trips, apart from like 10 weird minutes on mushrooms. But
I mean, that's part of the deal.
I kind of dove into it. Like when it became disgusting, I didn't go against it. I went even deeper. So what do you think? I definitely don't want to go for things like ayahuasca for now, because from what I've explored, it's a very serious thing that can have very serious mental consequences.
100%.
And one thing you told me when we were having dinner in Malta was people do ayahuasca once and then don't do it again. They say, oh, it was the most amazing thing I've done, it changed my life, but then they don't touch that shit again, which means they probably got traumatized and it was too much for them. So what do you suggest for, not even what do you suggest? You can't suggest because that would probably not be illegal. This is, by the way, this is the point where we say this is for educational purposes.
Even more, blah, blah, blah. Even more, this is all fiction.
This is all fiction. We're talking about if you were to write a book, a storybook for children.
Exactly. How random can your creativity go?
Yeah, so if a monkey were to write a book on a typewriter and type random characters, and the name of the book would be a beginner psychonaut wants to explore.
Even better, like a badger, right? What would a badger write?
Yes, the badger is even more appropriate. So I've done shrooms a few once. Like seriously, I've done LSD. I consider 200 plus micrograms to be like a real trip, where it's like that's the first real trip. It's like a threshold, the same
Sure.
as like 4+ grams of mushrooms.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
I think anything less doesn't really count as a real trip. I've done MDMA too many times in 1 year, like 6 times, up to 250 a night.
Yeah, so
Had unbelievable experiences. I've done a candy flip.
cool.
So what do you think is like a safe, at the same time, taking two things into consideration, like evolving psychedelics and exploring your psyche and going towards that line? Let me explain it like this. When I was first tripping on LSD, I was looking at this painting, and I had no sense of time, but I think I was sitting there for like 2 hours and looking at a painting.
It's sense. I mean, it's not completely unreasonable.
So and it was a painting of streets, like a street with a few buildings, and I can see that there's another street at the end, and it's like there's a turn.
Did
and
you see the cars moving? And shit?
Oh, dude! Like cars were moving, people were walking,
Fucking
people were
in the
on
street,
bicycles.
like,
There
yeah.
were people
There were
jumping.
hookers. Like,
There
everything.
were people jumping out the windows and making suicides all the fucking time.
Of course.
But what I saw, those cars driving down the street, they were taking the turn. There was a turn on the right, and they were like going behind the turn. And what I had in that trip, my thought was, that's the place I want to go. That's where I don't know what is there, and I don't control what is there, because I was still kind of here and there on a trip, and fully conscious and understanding and being kind of able to decide what's happening. So,
Right.
but you know what I'm talking about. I don't know what's there, so
Yeah.
I want to explore what's there behind the corner, while at the same time staying. It's impossible to stay safe. So what would a budger type on the book on this question?
No, you have to rephrase your question because it's too.
So for someone who wants to keep exploring altered states of consciousness in a way that's at the same time brings them closer to states where you don't really control yourself anymore, and you really, really go for a trip, like you go down the fucking water slide, but at the same time in a safe way.
This is hard. I mean, of course. I mean, this is easy stuff. The one, the basic stuff one can just Google how to trip safely. I mean, you need a controlled environment.
Yes.
Not too cold, not too hot. Nothing to jump from. No blades around. No screwdrivers. Power tools and.
Shit.
Like.
So my doxy massager goes.
No, I guess.
I have to lock it somewhere.
Maybe. You can still have a magic wand, I guess.
That's the same thing.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, no, I call it magic wand. In fact, I think it would be recommended, a magic wand. Sometimes it's particularly nurturing for the soul. Yeah, I mean, some people say you need to have a trip sitter. I don't particularly agree necessarily. Sometimes that can bring the experience in a bad direction because the person cannot relate to it.
What if it's experience? So we are assuming the trip sitter is experienced in tripping and has tripped like, I don't know, dozens of times in high doses and has had bad trips, and can stay the fuck out of my room if I want to stay alone and shut the fuck up and not even play UFC at any sound in another room, and I tell him to turn the fucking sound off. He will turn the fucking sound off to make sure I have a good trip. That's kind of the trip sitter I'm looking for.
Yeah, I guess, but I mean, I cannot speak because I've never really had a trip sitter that wasn't as high as I was. So I guess it doesn't classify.
What's the highest dose of LSD you've done?
About 10 tabs, about 1,000 micrograms.
How was that?
I can't remember all of it. I can't claim to remember all of it. It was something. I mean, it was as close as to schizophrenia as you can get. Like, no, it's not like
good way or in a bad way.
It's not like, oh, I'm tripping. No, you're like, oh, no, like you cannot verbalize. You can't really walk. It becomes like a highly debilitating.
Basically, just like lay on the ground and pee in your pants kind of thing.
Well, if you can have control over your bladder, because that's even the bladder usually. So It's not a recreational experience.
Yes.
No, it's only for really experienced people. Yeah, otherwise you'd be marked for months or years on end. But that time I fucked up. I kind of yeah. I love it. I do it maybe once a year, twice a year, that kind of thing. But it's always like I'm gonna come out of this experience as a slightly different person. So you have to be very careful.
Let's look at a few steps from taking 200 to taking 1,000. What would be like a few steps you can take from like to advance your psychedelic experiences?
You don't get to 1,000 until you've done at least 30 to 50 trips.
Like, let's say someone has done like 200, 250. So what's the next to take their journeys like one step higher?
Okay, well, you try to do cognitive things on 200 or 300, like drawing, writing.
I've ridden a bike.
Riding a bike.
I've done a crazy bike trip.
Or you can take notes. Try to take notes.
Operate heavy machinery.
Well, maybe not that far, but like fine motor skills. So you try to combine meaningful activities during the trip.
But like on 200 micrograms.
Yeah, it's a way to test how much familiarity and fitness you have built. Otherwise, you don't really have a way to gauge how good you've become at psychedelics, right? So you need to have some kind of point of reference, and so you identify certain activities. Like I can have very deep conversations on almost any compound. Very complex as well. I can meet people I've never known, and there's not necessarily them questioning whether I'm high on something. So you find ways to kind of challenge yourself, and in this way, that you go hiking, you do physically straining activities.
I've done a Brazilian jiu-jitsu but that's just microdose. But it was
Yeah,
still
whatever.
fun.
No, actually, microdose makes that kind of thing easier.
It was fun.
Yeah.
No, microdose hits me still, like I feel it. It's not like I don't feel it.
Well, then you have not
It gives
microdose.
it gives me like under 20 micrograms. I had like a sick
20.
20.
Yeah, 20 is not a microdose.
Yeah, I get like crazy energy, like a wave of energy.
Microdose is like 5.
Yeah,
microdose maybe up to 10. Okay.
So first is you do some like painting, writing, talking to people.
Yeah, talking to people, but talking intentionally about certain topics, like certain debates. So you try to wrap the psychedelic experience around activities, right? So that you're not just lost in the stories. You try to actually use it as a tool, and then you try to see during and afterwards how the psychedelic changed the output, the performance, or the direction of all these activities, and so that you're not really tripping. It becomes more like, what's my life like if I drink a coffee or if I don't drink a coffee. It becomes a completely functional layer of biochemistry.
So instead of doing LSD to trip, you use it as a self-explorational educational tool. Where you experiment. What can I do with this, and how will I do the same thing I would normally do under the influence?
At this stage, for me, psychedelics are like going to the gym for the mind. Like I very rarely go, I'm just gonna get fucked up now. Like that phase is kind of like done. Now it's work. It's always work.
Okay.
Most of the time.
So that's like step one. What's like one step further? Once I've done a few trips, once a badger has done a few trips, painting, writing, talking to people.
Then there's interactions with other people, meaning getting things done with other people, whether it can be missions, whether it can be sex, whether it can be talking about very meaningful things, about problems, about emotional things. So you start creating a meaningful community.
Recording a podcast.
I think there's YouTube clips of people doing interviews on different drugs. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm making this up. But that is like you try to get people involved, so that it becomes like a group flow kind of thing. But I mean, this is only the tip of the iceberg. You know, this is a massive field, and eventually you need to get very specific. You know, there's a few rules of thumbs and generalizations, but not too many. Yeah, it's a sport. Really, it's a sport.
Okay, so I'll try. The badger will try to experiment with.
Yeah, and map different themes, right? Sports, problem solving, arts, relationships. You know, all you map your experience, and then you use the psychedelics as a tool to try to change the way you develop or approach such and such.
Okay.
Just realized. Is it going?
Yes.
Do you want to hear something you've never heard before? And this is true, and Andrea knows this very well.
Shit, fuck. Motherfucker.
He used to do this in the elevator, and it was smaller than my elevator, so the ultra sounds. I was getting that. He was doing this before we were going to a club.
Fun sounds and things aside, and before we go to get our steaks Mario just booked for us.
Let's unlock the rest of this podcast.
Let's unlock let's unlock one more topic. But before we get to the topic, the topic is health and degeneracy.
Beautiful.
Can you name all the mind-altering illicit substances you've done?
No, it's about 100. It's impossible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've done all the popular ones and many
only known to scientists, and a handful only given to laboratory animals. So it would be impossible. It would be nonsense.
Can you say a handful given only to
laboratory animals?
Yes. Okay. I wanted to make sure everyone hears that. So you've been quite a degenerate when it comes to substances.
No, but also methodical. I mean,
yes. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. What are some of the things if a badger was about to experiment a little bit more and explore that world a little bit more in countries where that is legal, obviously? What do you suggest the badger does? If one chooses to identify as a badger in this modern PC world.
Are we still talking about health, or
yes?
I'm confused.
I mean, I'm identifying myself as a badger.
Right. No, that's beautiful. Yeah.
So Canada has rights. I have rights as well.
Yeah.
So what do you suggest a badger like me focuses on or does to also not sacrifice my longevity?
Right. Okay. Fair enough. What are the lowest risk drugs at the level of physiology and brain chemistry? The less toxic ones, I guess.
Is it a question?
Well, you asked me the question. I don't fucking know.
I don't know.
I think mushrooms have been proved to be, and in the Netherlands, I think truffles are completely legal.
Yeah, truffles are legal.
So there's been studies that found like a toxic, lethal dose of mushrooms to be quantified in like 2-3 kilos or something stupid. So that is pretty safe. Otherwise, it would not be legal in such a developed country like the Netherlands. So I think that's a good point to start. Also, because if something truly crazy happens, the legal liabilities would be more limited than something like LSD, where it's just illegal everywhere.
Yes.
Then I guess Portugal is a point of reference because over there, possession of any substance is decriminalized. So if there's a place where anyone would want to be a bit more colorful, maybe there, just in terms of legal liabilities. But in the Netherlands, one can experience marijuana and mushrooms. They should not be combined because truffles, because psychosis then can become very likely. So, but I think that if somebody wants to really dip their toes into this world, truffles could be a good entry point.
But what I mean, what if a budger like me who has done shrooms in a decent dose once, has done LSD once, and wants to keep exploring this.
I'm telling you, like you could spend decades just on mushrooms.
No,
You've never done mushrooms. You've done mushrooms once, twice. You could do mushrooms for hundreds of times and still learn new things.
So, given that you've done so many different substances,
Yeah.
if anyone was as crazy to indulge in such an experience, which I'm never planning to do, what would be some of the things to think about to make sure I don't die, don't fuck up the health? Obviously, exploring on what the effective dose is, what the LD50 is, like a dose.
There's online resources that try to teach things like Aeroid, like Psychonaut Wiki, or Wikipedia even. Like, the internet is full of stuff like that. But I would say that the non-traditional psychedelics or mind-altering substances are non-traditional for reasons. They're not just not easy to find. They're not easy to find because there's not a market for them.
No, I'm not even talking about the ones that are given only to lab animals. I'm talking about the regular stuff that people use. People use weed, people use MDMA, they use mushrooms, they use LSD, and then they start getting into things like cocaine, the badger we're talking about might be interested in trying ketamine.
Right.
I wouldn't want to probably do coke, but I'm like thinking about it.
There is like the right place and context for any drug to be a growing experience. There's just some that need more context, preparation, and safety nets than others. But I mean, there's only really a handful of drugs that are overtly toxic, and alcohol is actually one of them. So we're not starting from an easy point, but you need enormous, because basically for any listener, I use the word sport not randomly. Like if somebody asks me, what should I do to minimize the risks of skydiving? He says, you get fucking licensed, right? You just do training stuff. You go to some kind of for drugs, there's not such a thing as like getting a license in drugs, but there's still kind of you try to understand harm reduction. So you can just Google harm reduction, such drug, and then there's all these resources. You try to understand a bit some basic biology, some basic first aid experiences, or the level of keeping a good diet, hydration. It's an extreme sport, so it requires extreme education and responsibility. This is why really I would approach this as literally an extreme sport. There's no way anyone would do an extreme sport without deep and intense preparation, whether it is off-piste snowboarding, or it's like a cave spearfishing, or skydiving, paragliding. All this shit is done very, very carefully. Drugs are all extreme sports.
Actually, it reminds me of how I started doing anything more than weed. Because when I started thinking about trying mushrooms for the first time, the thing I understood when talking to my friends is mushrooms totally change your life. They totally change the way you think. What I wanted to understand is, do you go a bit mental or do you get a bit enlightened? And I spent around a year just reading something here and there, listening to podcasts, listening to interviews, reading some stuff on the internet, before I understood, okay, it seems, I'm pretty sure that this shit doesn't fuck you up, it enlightens you.
No, but again, this is almost irrelevant, because you should take, let's say, mushrooms, or even weed, like a skateboard, right? A skateboard can turn you into Tony Hawk's or Stephen Hawking, right? And I guess Stephen Hawking would be best case scenario in some other way, right? It's a fucking wooden board with wheels on it. It doesn't come with any kind of dogma. You jump on it and then you either have the time of your life or you end your life, right? Or you completely fuck up your life. So let's say Tony Hawk himself. He's not obese. I don't know what his relationship with drugs or with his own diet, or to get to the point where he got many things dialed in about his training, about his, the way he lives his life. There is contingency measures that need to be applied. Otherwise, a skateboard, it's just a piece of wood with wheels on it. You can't have any prediction about where it's going to go. Weed and mushrooms are the same thing. And in fact, in many ways, I think a skateboard is very a good example for weed, because skateboards are cheap. They're easily attainable. You just walk into a shop. It's not a parachute. So I want to buy a parachute. It's going to be 5,000 euros. How the fuck are you going to get a parachute? A skateboard, 20 euros, or go on eBay, 5 euros, you have a skateboard. Even a child can buy it. And you don't need to go on a plane like a skydiving. No, you can just go outside on the street. So weed is the same thing. You can buy like this or just get offered it, and then you start going on this green skateboard. And at the beginning you think, oh, I'm going, and then you slip a certain way and you break a knee. You
have your first time.
Exactly. You start snapping fingers.
For 3 hours.
You start puking, but you're still not dying, because it's not easy to die on a skateboard either, right?
Yes. But you have those experiences where I'm not doing this for a while.
Yeah, and skateboarding is prime for this. That time you really split your wrist. You look at the board with maybe I'll do it next week. I'll get back to it next week, and then for like 2 years I'm doing on the fucking skateboard.
Yeah.
So I think weed and skateboarding are a good analogy, because they're easy to access. They both have the potential to really take your body and mind to certain highs, but also to extreme lows. So if one wants to learn the sport of weed, there needs to be a social context, a moral context, a spiritual context, a support network of friends and loved ones. Otherwise, you turn fucking psychotic and schizophrenic. Weed is known to do that. In the laboratory, is a risk factor for developing psychosis. It is statistically observed. So, but also, skateboards are statistically observed to cause concussions. What the fuck does that mean, right? It's hard to draw that kind of correlation.
So tell me if I'm getting you wrong. So there are two sides of the equation. One being, or two components of the equation. One being explore the drug, understand a safe way to use it, Google what it is. Weed being a thing that can cause psychotic breakdowns, and LSD being something that can fuck you up for life, especially in higher doses. So that's one part, but the other part is Tony Hawk didn't probably smoke too much or did too many drugs. Maybe he did, but like take care of your life and body and mental state in general, and indulge in your explorations, knowing that your life is both mentally and physically and in many other ways, your life is good before you start doing this new extreme sport, which you do with extreme caution, finding out what you do, not just taking a tab that someone gave you at a music festival.
Exactly, and this brings in the conversation we had earlier between the geek and the degenerate.
Yes.
They both really make a very powerful couple. And this really comes into the psychedelic work and in extreme sports. I myself, I'm a licensed skydiver, free dive. I split test different models also in that field, which doesn't have anything to do with drugs, because it's again an altered state. So I'm agnostic to altered state, and so it's very important to really keep in mind that there is a very closed loop at the level of like interaction with the world when you are on a certain state of consciousness, and you need to make sure that that is validated, stress tested, improved, flexible but not too flexible, strong but not too rigid. It's a constant dance. It's both an art form and a sport, and this is why it's not easy.
So basically, make sure that when you step on that skateboard, you are in many ways prepared for that, and when you do break, make sure you break your wrist instead of fall off a fucking ramp and die.
Exactly. Like Tony Hawk didn't go from 0 to 50-meter long fucking ramps.
And the thing I want to say is at this point, because I've touched the subject of drugs several times in my podcast, but I always say that I never encourage anyone doing them. And I also believe that, like, if it's not your thing and if it's not something you're interested in, you shouldn't do it. What I'm only encouraging is, when I teach guys how to talk with chicks, is if that's a thing you do, it's totally fine to talk about it. I've never encouraged people to do that, and that's something worth mentioning. Like, if you,
It's a big thing for society. Like, it's
Yes.
not like people need to have their own sovereignty when it comes to, then there's legal debates there. Everybody does what they think they can do, and I cannot advocate. In fact, I in many ways I discourage these kind of things for most people, because they're illegal, because in many ways they have led to catastrophe in the past. And
well,
in fact,
you're Dr. Jack after all.
yeah, exactly. Like I went pretty hard in educating myself to create my own licensing system around these extreme sports. I did the work for years, over a decade, and this is hard to scale on a mass level, and so this is why traditionally these kind of experiences were only available to the clergy, to shamans or priests. These were all people that were ascribed to a certain engineered elite, for lack of a better word. There were people that had to study for many years something, or they had to master their body in a certain way. They had to have people under their responsibility. There were systems in check. They were not just
Whereas
randoms.
now it's easily accessible. If
Exactly.
You're not, if
They've
you're
never
not
been.
too stupid.
They've never been accessible. In fact, even for the easiest accessible ones, mushrooms, many tribes had specific laws that said that if the random people in the tribe, the one at the lowest level, ate mushrooms and they were not given by the priest themselves, they had to be killed. That kind of thing. Pretty
I've heard
extreme
about
stuff.
like pushed out of the community.
Yeah,
I've heard
but
about
sometimes
that,
it's aggressive, far more aggressive
I've
than
heard
that.
about that.
So, psychedelics or mind-altering substances in general have always been highly regulated. And so that begs the question, why? Right? Because they are powerful for
And
good
I've
and for
also
bad.
heard like the stories about how the let's call them peasants started using some other psychedelic substances that had very many side effects, and that had like a huge it led to a huge decline of empires and
I mean, there's a lot of speculations and we don't really know, but altered states can make and altered states can break big time.
So before we go to stakes, let's kind of end with a story. With a story about how we were cooking a few days back. We were cooking some liver and eggs when we were having dinner, the three of us. And we were talking about coconut oil. And you said you have very love-hate relationships with coconut oil and wonderful memories from coconut oil.
I
It still
healed.
brings you flashbacks.
It brings me flashbacks, but I'm mostly healed from that story. And that was a few years ago. I mean, like it's just a little cute, messed up story. But I was on my way to Laos for another messed up expedition, I guess. And I had my flight the day after, and I got a call from one of my crazy sex work friends, and they're like, "Jack, we're having an orgy. Come over now." I was like, "Oh, now, okay." So I just left and went there, and piles of body all fucking each other, and they picked coconut oil as the lubricant of choice, and everybody was lathed in fucking coconut oil, eyeballs included. Like, it was everywhere, in every hole, including I don't know, fucking nostrils and eye sockets. So it was great. There were also a lot of narcotics, not too many safety measures in place. It was one of those more reckless ones, I guess. But I jumped into a pre-made situation. I didn't have any say in how it was to be engineered, I guess. So I just got swallowed into this lubricated vortex of bodies and minds, and it is a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of improvised orgies, and that was one with exclusively stunning people, so it's good for the heart as well, I guess. And at some point there was just this smell, right? It became like a thing. The smell of this fucking coconut oil was literally on my brain. It was not just in my nose. It was literally like coconut oil became my, cerebral spinal fluid, right? That stuff you have around your brain, for me, was coconut oil. And I was laying down, and there were like piles of body on me. It would have been like about 8 to 10 people, something like that. Or maybe a dozen maximum. I don't think so. Yeah. And so I was laying back. There was just like 2 chicks giving me head, and maybe even a dude, licking my asshole, that kind of thing. And it was like there was a lot going on, and I was just laying back on I was just like kind of like quite altered on a lot of chemicals. And all of a sudden I hear a strange sound I'd never really heard ever before. It's a very specific sound. That is like, what is this sound, right? And you are on chemicals. I was like, is this sound real? Well, and it was like something like this, and then the sound became like paired with this smell, right? A smell that I smelled many times before, but in other contexts. That was like burnt chicken, kind of like. So now I have coconut oil, a lot of like very thick, deep coconut oil smell with burnt chicken, which is again a combo that is
Like
rare,
Mario's cooking.
pretty much. And then this bizarre sound, and then all of a sudden I feel pain, right? Because I start getting slapped and punched by random people. So now I'm basically getting beaten up in this bizarre, drunken, smelling, because my head is on fire. I just laid back onto a candle, right? One of the many candles that was creating the ambiance, right? And then so my head is on fire, and there's random, high as fuck, fucking people that all of a sudden have just turned into firefighters onto my head, just slapping me and punching me while there were still people giving me head. So it was like one of the most confusing situations you can possibly imagine, right? But they succeeded in extinguishing my head. And at this point I was extra more confused. I have a significant bald patch on my head. And then we kept having fun, I guess. There was some laughter, an unmistakable smell of burnt chicken there for a long time. I guess bringing on some kind of innovation from the plain coconut oil smell. And then by 5 or 6 in the morning, I realized I have a flight 3 or 4 hours later, and I panic and I leave, and I scramble my way back home somehow, stumbling and limping and all confused and all hallucinating. And I managed to call a friend, beg him to drive me to the airport, and it takes me there. I just kick things into my bag and manage to go through security and everything, and then I'm on this plane, coming down on several drugs, breaking all my rules, basically the level of self-care and harm reduction, and then just there twitching and having a pretty toxic time with a bald patch on my head and completely covered in coconut oil, just barren to that economy flight seat for another 9 to 10 hours. These are the things that I live for in many ways, and potentially will die for. Yeah.
Very beautiful story.
Thank you.
Touching and heart touching, and
Yes,
it has been a
no,
very
nose
lovely,
touching as well. Yes.
very lovely, innocent conversation.
Cheers.
This is obviously scripted and all done by actors based on a script that a
This is
badger typed on a typewriter. This is all
This is all
completely
made up,
fictional
completely
and should be
made up.
taken only as a piece of art.
Absolutely.
Just like Star Wars.
Yeah, this is all improv.
This is all improv. This is all fucking fake, dude. I have to say that one day on a different planet, we have to do part 2. We have to talk about the stuff we didn't talk. We have to talk about your graduation party, about your career in porn, about your career as male escort, and all of that shit.
There's many things.
That's definitely something I want to cover, but that's a whole different podcast. Let's leave this one to drugs and to all the altered substances, states of consciousness, and we'll leave that for the other one. And now let's go for some fucking steaks.
Let's go for some fucking steaks. Cool.
Well, guys, I hope you like this episode, which is a little bit different than other episodes I recorded on this podcast. If you like this and you're watching this on YouTube, then please give this video a thumbs up. Or if you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify or any other podcasting platform, please give this podcast a 5-star review. It simply helps me reach more guys and help more guys take control of their dating lives and learn how to overcome their fears and start dating girls they really like. Or if you have a wing who's interested in topics like this one, then just send him a link to this podcast episode. And as I said in the beginning of a podcast, if you want to figure out what exactly are the biggest mistakes you're making in your day game, then sign up for the coaching call by going to strobert.blog/call. That's it for today. Thank you for listening, and bye, guys.